What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about how vaping and smokeless tobacco are absolutely destroying your ability to both perform and recover. And if you care at all about the product you put out on the field, you should probably do away with both the pen and the chew. All right, so we all know cigarettes are bad. If you grew up in my generation or the one just before mine or maybe the one just after mine, you probably got beaten into submission about how terrible cigarette smoke is for you through ad campaigns and things like that. It's funny, the tobacco lobby actually had to pay for those after they got sued. I forget, it was truth.org maybe was the name of the nonprofit that was putting together all those. Well, anyways, you know that cigarette smoke's bad. It causes lung cancer. They did commercials about like how being an athlete, like you shouldn't smoke cigarettes because you're not going to be able to breathe. And turns out when you're an athlete, you need very much to be able to breathe to perform. So most athletes are under the impression that cigarettes are bad for them, but they think if it's not like smoke, then they're okay, right? It's not going to damage my lung capacity. I'm not going to get lung cancer, so I can use nicotine and it's not going to be a big deal. Well, that's only one of the issues that cigarettes really cause. Nicotine itself is, although not a carcinogen, right? We know nicotine doesn't cause cancer. There's no correlative data to suggest that the nicotine is what gives you cancer that's in cigarette smoke. It's the ignited tobacco along with all the rest of the crap that they put in there that's going to give you lung cancer. It's the fact that you're breathing in smoke that's going to diminish your lung capacity, right? So kids are under the impression, or people in general, if I'm not smoking it, it's okay. It's not going to have that big an effect on me. I'll still be able to breathe. I'll still be able to, not have lung cancer. When in reality, like that's one of the smallest parts of nicotine, right? And smoking cigarettes in general. Nicotine has a whole host of other side effects. We've got nicotine receptors in our body. We're designed to be able to metabolize and utilize it. So you can imagine if we have receptors that there are things that it does within our body. It's just like, THC, cannabis, like we have cannabinoid receptors within our body. We're designed to be able to do something with that. And nicotine is no different. Nicotine is an anti-inflammatory. And if you keep up with me and my work and the site at all, and if not, I'll link I'll put a link in the description to the article I put out on Saturday about recovery, right? What is the first step of recovery, right? So after we training is the trigger for recovery. What is the first step? It's actually the inflammatory process. It actually starts while you're lifting. If you've ever gotten a pump before, or what we call transient hypertrophy, it's muscle growth that doesn't stick around that long. That's an inflammatory process, right? So inflammation is absolutely necessary for you to be able to recover after training or playing a game. And it's actually like really necessary for you to be able to continue lifting while you're in the gym or playing while you're playing. So the inflammatory process is a very important one, and nicotine actually slows down that process. Actually, I'm going to pull up we had an athlete when I was at the athletes compound, right? It's located inside Saddlebrook. We did a lot of NFL combine prep, a ton of MLB spring training prep, but we obviously did a lot of pro tennis. Back in the day, we had guys like Marty Fish. We had, who are some of the other guys? Jack Sock, Tennis Sangren. We even had, for a month and a half, I was Jennifer Capriati's strength and conditioning coach when she was trying to make her return back to the U.S. Open. I think this was back in like 2016, 2015, sometime around then. We were very well known for tennis. Everybody came there to train, and we did that. So we had one athlete. His name was John Isner, right? If you're not a big tennis person, you may have heard of John for two reasons. One, he is a giant. This guy is 6'11", almost 7 foot tall. You see him walking around in public, you'd probably think he was a basketball player, but no, he was a tennis player. He also has the longest match ever recorded, and I think either the second or third longest match ever recorded at 11 hours long, right? This spanned over the course of 3 days because at Wimbledon, they don't have lights, so when the sun goes down, they can't play anymore. John played all 11 hours and ended up winning. He won an SB for it. He was in the body issue, the ESPN body issue. So you probably heard of him. Well, back in the day, he had this one sponsor, and it was called Anata Block. All right, Anata Block was an anti-inflammatory that was actually made from nicotine. They used nicotine as the anti-inflammatory, as opposed to like an NSAID or like a CBD or whatever the case was. It was called Anata Block, and there's a commercial for it. I actually have a cameo in this commercial. I'm going to play it now. So if you're listening, you'll be able to hear how ridiculous it sounds. But if you're watching, you'll be able to see it. I'm going to pull it up now. Longest match in tennis history. So this was John, and this is the commercial.
Whatever your activity, Anata Block
That's my old boss.
It's scientifically proven to help manage excessive inflammation in joints and muscles.
So you can't see right now, but behind him, somebody's doing an overhead press, and that's actually me. You can see my shadow a little bit. I remember this day because we had to do that take. We couldn't stop laughing when John says this line right here. So we had to we had to do that take, like, I'm not even exaggerating, probably 30 times. And so I had 45s on either side of the bar because they wanted to make it look like strong people were training in there. I must have done 100 military presses with 135 pounds, and I thought my arms were going to fall off by the end of it. But here, I'll scale it back so that you guys can actually hear the line that made us laugh over and over and over again. But that was me.
In joints and muscles.
No pain, go train.
That's the one. No pain, go train. We could not hold it in every time he said that. And if you watch, you can see his face. This is actually this take right here. He still laughed, but that was the one that they ended up doing because I think we spent like a half hour on this one 3-second scene, and they just couldn't do it anymore.
No pain, go train.
You actually see him smiling a little bit. But anyways, so that was something called Anata Block. That was a real life. I guess you call it a supplement that was made from nicotine that was designed to stop the inflammatory process. It was an anti-inflammatory. So biggest thing wrong when it comes to recovery, nicotine is actually a anti-inflammatory. It's going to decrease blood flow to the area. It's going to, we'll get into that next. So just for now, know that it's a vasoconstrictor. Now we're going to kind of move on to the next thing. Or not a vasoconstrictor, just know that it's an anti-inflammatory, and now we're going to move on to the fact that it's a vasoconstrictor. So we have veins and arteries all throughout our body, right? They carry oxygenated blood, non-oxygenated blood to and from the heart. That's how our working muscles get oxygen to be able to perform all the duties that they have to do as muscles. That's also how we get nutrients to the muscles and garbage out of them, right? So nicotine itself is actually a vasoconstrictor. So like a constriction to make smaller, like a boa constrictor is going to constrict its prey, right? Nicotine is actually going to constrict your blood vessels. What this is going to do is it's going to slow down blood flow and oxygen flow to the muscles that are damaged and or working, right? So this is not just a recovery thing. This is a performance thing too. If you have nicotine in your body, right, and it's acting and doing what it's meant to do, it's going to slow down blood flow to the working muscles. This is going to make you feel tired earlier. It's going to make your legs, if you've ever gotten that like burning feeling where you're telling yourself it's, I've got all this lactic acid. It's going to make that happen much faster because oxygen's not going to be able to like keep up and get to the working muscles, and you're not going to be able to shuttle out that lactic acid to the liver to convert it to glucose. We call it the Cori cycle. If the blood vessels are constricted that much, you could imagine if I've got to get from like my quads to my liver and back, and the highway that I'm trying to drive down is congested, it's going to take more time, right? And that's what happens. So it's not just slowing down recovery, getting oxygen and nutrients to the muscles. When you play, it's actually slowing down that process, and it can make like your burning muscle sensation that you get while playing and training, it can make it linger longer and start faster. Another thing that nicotine does, so it's a vasoconstrictor, it's an anti-inflammatory. Those are the two things we have so far. It increases cortisol levels, right? So when you train, like cortisol is like not the worst thing in the world. There's a period of time in I think like the late 2000s or early 2010s where, everybody was convinced that the reason they were overweight was because they had elevated cortisol levels, right? And that's part of it. We do have elevated cortisol levels because we are stressed all the time. We don't sleep. We eat like absolute crap. We eat things that aren't even food, right? So we're going to have higher levels of cortisol, right? what this does is it actually, in addition to some other things, it's a stress hormone. It decreases protein synthesis. So within the muscle, we have, if you've ever heard of your metabolism, right? We have two parts of your metabolism. We have anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism may sound familiar if you've ever heard of anabolic steroids or being anabolic. Anabolism is the process of building, right? Catabolism is the process of breaking down. You've heard maybe like your favorite fitness influence saying they don't want to go catabolic, right? That means they don't want to be in a process of breaking down. They want to be anabolic. They want to be put in a position to be able to grow, right? And that's protein synthesis, is that like anabolic process there. So cortisol levels are going to decrease our ability to go into that protein synthesis and build and recover, right? This is going to increase your recovery time. That's not a good thing, right? So cortisol is not going to have a huge effect on your performance in the moment, but is absolutely going to be detrimental to your ability to recover. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is luteinizing hormone. All right, luteinizing hormone is something that's very important for testosterone production, and nicotine is going to decrease your luteinizing hormone. These hormones act on the Leydig cells within your body, and that's what signals you to create more testosterone. So if we're decreasing luteinizing hormone, we're more than likely going to end up with a decrease in overall testosterone production, which is going to have a lot of effects. One, this might be one of the reasons why our fertility rates and testosterone levels in men here in the United States are trending towards zero. A lot of people use nicotine. That's definitely more than likely part of the equation. But, lack of testosterone is going to make it harder to compete, and it's going to make it a lot harder to recover, right? You need testosterone in order to be able to get into like anabolism, to have that protein synthesis, among many other things. But just understand, if your testosterone levels are lower, it's going to be harder for you to lose weight. It's going to be harder for you to put on mass. And it's going to be very, very, very hard for you to recover. All right. It also, in young ladies, it can decrease follicle stimulating hormone, right? It's kind of similar to luteinizing hormone, but it's going to have a more drastic effect on the young ladies. And what this will do, it decreases estradiol, and it will decrease bone density, right? So bone density is like very important when it comes to sports. We want very strong, very hard bones so they don't break. And having, that decrease in FSH or follicle stimulating hormone can lead to a higher likelihood of you breaking a bone, which is not good, right? That's more of a performance thing than it is a recovery thing. But, broken bones aren't good. They take you out of play. The next thing we're going to talk about, it impacts recovery from injuries in a big way. And I'm going to pull up a study here. All right, so this is from back in 1998. This was a long time ago. We're talking 25 years ago. Man, that is a long time ago. The effect of nicotine on the rate and strength of long bone fracture healing. Now, what this was a study that they did on rabbits, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And it kind of messed up. They broke the bones of these rabbits and then gave them nicotine or didn't give them nicotine, and then they checked to see if the bone fracture had healed after a given period of time. And what they found, they killed them. Like, I don't know how these people do this kind of stuff. It's fascinating. It's wildly important information, but to have to break the bones of rabbits and then kill them just to see what it does, I don't know that I would be cut out for that. All right. So what they found was after, how long was it? It was, let me roll through here. Discussion. So the amount of nicotine that they gave them was the equivalent of 20 to 30 cigarettes a day, right? And they assessed healing. And God, I don't know why I'm not able to find the amount of time it was. Consistently smaller. So what they found essentially was 13% of these rabbits had what we call a non-union after 2 time. Yeah, I couldn't find it earlier, and I thought maybe when I pulled it up, I'd be able to find it. All right, but essentially when every other bone, right, from the ones not using tobacco were healed, they found that the ones from the rabbits that were using, not tobacco, sorry, but nicotine, did not heal, right? And this makes total sense because it can, have an impact on our hormones. It is a vasoconstrictor. It's not going to allow nutrients and oxygen to get to the bone when they need to, and it can be detrimental, right? You imagine you're a big cigarette smoker, you're a big vapor, right? Because vaping is a lot more dense as far as like nicotine goes than like cigarette smoke is. But let's say you're a big vapor or big chewing tobacco. That's another one, man. People don't realize, there's like between 0.5 milligram and 2 milligrams of nicotine in every cigarette, right? So you're looking at, let's say at most, probably how many cigarettes are in a box? It's got to be 20, right? Like 40 milligrams in a box. So if you're a pack a day smoker, it's about 40 milligrams. And one can of chewing tobacco, there's upwards of 150 to 180 milligrams, right? So divide that by 2, that's like 90 cigarettes. That's like almost 5 packs of cigarettes a day. So that's a lot of nicotine. So if you're somebody who is a can a day or a 5-pack a day smoker or chewer, it's going to have a really big impact on your ability to recover from actual injury. And we know this, like athletes get hurt. You're going to break bones. You're going to separate joints. You're going to tear ligaments. And this nicotine use is absolutely going to slow down the healing process. If you get into, let's talk about a high school athlete with a broken bone, right? So let's say you're a football player, first game of the season in September, you break your arm, right? Like 6-week recovery time until like you're able to kind of play. It's not really completely healed yet, but you're in a position where you can play again. That puts you towards the end of October. Oh, well, I chew or I vape, and now maybe my recovery is pushed back to like November. And by that time, you've got how many games left in the season? Maybe none. And you could have been back in October, but because you decided that you wanted to be a chewer or a vapor or a snus user, you're going to go ahead and put yourself in a bad position to recover, right? So same thing in college. You could lose an entire season, an important season, because of a failure to heal when it comes to your bones. So the nicotine, let's go back here. Nicotine is going to slow down recovery from both an injury perspective and a training perspective, and it's going to decrease your ability to perform because it's going to have a terrible effect on your hormones. It's going to have a terrible effect on, it's a vasoconstrictor, so you're not going to be able to get blood flow and oxygen to the working muscles, nutrients. You're not going to be able to get lactic acid out of the muscles into the liver via the Cori cycle to get back into the muscle there. So all around, not a great thing for kids to be doing. All right. In this next section, we're going to talk about some of the ways that kids are using smokeless tobacco and how much nicotine they have in them, and like what the effects would be. So how is your average So how is your average high school athlete or college athlete or even professional athlete getting their nicotine? Like, how is it getting delivered to them? You've got really 3 big culprits here. Baseball, hockey, and even parts of football, like chewing tobacco or dip, is probably one of the number one ways. Let's see. Every other sport seems to be either vaping or snus pouches, right? So we talked earlier about how much nicotine a cigarette has, which is between like 0.5 and 2 milligrams of nicotine. Your average vape, right? So it's really hard to measure, but like a 300 puff, 300 puff vape pen is probably going to have 20 milligrams of nicotine. One that's 600 puffs is going to be like 2 packs of cigarettes. Whereas like a 300 puff would be like 1 pack of cigarettes. Your average snus pouch is going to have on average like probably around 10 milligrams of nicotine. And I don't know many people who, when they put one in, sometimes it's 2. So you're looking at like a pack of cigarettes, or let's say, not 10, like 6 to 8. So like 2 is going to be almost like a pack of cigarettes here. And then your average pinch that somebody who's using chewing tobacco or dip is probably going to be like maybe an eighth of a can. So you've got 160, 180. Let's just make it 200 just to make it easy. Eighth of a can. Oh man, I'm not mathing real well here. That'd be like 15%. So like a pack of cigarettes or maybe a little bit less. So that's how they're getting them, right? We talked about how like damaging nicotine is. And to be honest, like if it wasn't for lung cancer and like pulmonary issues, like smoking would probably be substantially better for athletes, right? Because it doesn't have nearly as much nicotine in it. Whereas like your vaping, your chewing tobacco, and your snus pouches are going to have like a lot more. It's very concentrated. Now they've done studies to see like how much of it actually gets absorbed and uptaked into the body, and it can be as little as like a 10 milligram snus pouch, like 2 to 3 milligrams. But you're still talking 2 to 3 cigarettes per pouch, right? If you have 2 pouches in your mouth, then you're talking about like 6 cigarettes, and you're not just doing that once, you're doing that a bunch of times, right? And most athletes do it around the times that they practice and play. So I know when I was playing hockey, like the first thing I'd want to do when I got done was put a dip in, right? And that's probably the worst possible thing to do. So, like having that much nicotine in a super concentrated form, and this is how athletes are getting it, it's like a very, very bad thing. We talked about inflammation, it being an anti-inflammatory, talked about vasoconstriction, we talked about it messing with hormone levels. Like there's so many reasons why like nicotine is bad and cigarette smoke is bad enough, but then to have these super concentrated forms of nicotine where kids and young adults are getting it, like it's not really a good thing. So if you're working with kids or athletes or even like young adults who use nicotine, like really try your best to educate them on how terrible it really is, the things it's going to do to them. It's going to make it harder to recover. It's going to make it harder to play. Like think it's not just like the pulmonary issues or like the diminished lung capacity, right? That's not the worst part. The worst part is, well, that it's addictive, right? But it's going to make it harder to play. It's going to make that burning sensation in your legs like come faster, last longer. It's going to make your shifts shorter. They're going to have to be, because you're not going to be able to keep up. So you're going to be able to breathe, right? But all that oxygen that you're breathing in is going to have a really hard time getting to the working muscles if you're somebody who uses nicotine fairly regularly. It's also going to be very hard to recover because of its anti-inflammatory properties, right? And then if you do get injured, it's going to make it much harder for you to actually recover from that injury and get back to normal. So if you're an athlete or an athlete, have that conversation with them. Make sure they understand that it's not just the diminished lung capacity. It's not just the fact that it could give you lung cancer, right? It's going to destroy your performance. It might not kill you, right? We know, again, nicotine's not a carcinogen. It'll get expensive as you get older. It'll really mess with your pocketbook or your wallet. It'll mess with your bank account, but it'll also mess with your ability to play this sport to the highest possible level for as long as you possibly can, right? So if you're a kid and you're watching this, we probably don't get a lot of kids watching this. Like, stop using smokeless tobacco, right? No dip, no snus, no vaping. But if you have a kid, right, just keep an eye on them. Make sure this isn't something that you're seeing them do. It's not okay as far as their performance goes, right? With it being a vasoconstrictor, it can also cause heart issues. So it is, in many ways, deadly as well. Vaping hasn't been around long enough for us to see the total effects of all of it. But if they're, not in great shape as far as having elevated cholesterol and blockages and stuff like that, and we're seeing kids in their teens have these issues now, vaping is going to exacerbate that problem, right? So if you're an athlete using any vaping or smokeless tobacco products, stop. And if you're a parent or a coach and you have kids that may be tempted to kind of use these things, or maybe they are using them, have that conversation with them about, the effects of their performance, right? Because the kid's not going to listen to you saying, oh, this is going to be like, you're going to die from this one day, right? He's going to listen, or she is going to listen to you saying, this is going to make you worse at your sport, right? So think terms of like short term and what it's going to do to them and how they're going to struggle to play the game. And I think you'll have a lot more success. So don't worry about telling them it's going to kill them. Make sure you tell them they're going to suck at their sport. I think that's probably the easiest way to get these kids to listen. All right, well, there you have it. That's it for today. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully now you understand that it's just not just cigarette smoke that's bad for athletes. It's nicotine in general. And if you don't understand that, then watch it again, because all the information's there. You should be well versed in it. Now, if you are a parent who has a kid, convey that to them. Tell them all the terrible things it can do for them. I know kids don't listen to this could kill you, right? So tell them this is going to make you suck at your sport. And if you are an athlete who's using smokeless tobacco or vaping products, just do your best to quit. I know it's not easy. Nicotine's very, very addictive. But do everything you can to quit, and your body and your performance on the field will absolutely thank you for it. I guess that's it for today. Check back in next week. We've been dropping these on Monday. Usually in the past it had been on Tuesdays, but I've been having a lot more time on Mondays, and I got a very early client and then not a whole lot going on. So I've got plenty of time to sit here and get in front of the mic and then edit and deal with these. So keep looking out. And next week, I believe my goal is to talk about like preseason conditioning and all the downfalls of organized sports and their attempts at conditioning before the seasons start. We'll see you next time.